If you're anything like me, at one point you probably thought that rechargeable batteries are just rechargeable batteries. They're pretty much all relatively similar, but turns out that is completely wrong. You know, I always wondered why every time I went to use one of my rechargeable batteries, I have a whole bunch of AA Duracells. I saw reviews that they were the highest capacity, they're the best, so I'd go to use them and then they'd be like half dead, or eventually it started to get to the point where devices would not even be powered by them. And so I went digging and found out quite a bit that I'll explain, like how the most commonly known brands like Duracell and Energizer are basically a waste of money in my opinion for my use case, and maybe yours, where I just want to have a bunch of rechargeables that will basically last forever in storage, but still be charged and ready to go even years later, even if I almost never need them. But normally that wouldn't work because they only claim to hold a charge for up to 1 year in storage, with only about a 10-year total shelf life, even if you barely use them. But after a bunch of digging, I found that there is actually one type of battery that will be ready to go, still mostly charged, even after 10 years in storage. So literally, it can hold a single charge longer than the other brand's entire battery lifespan. And I want to point out this video is not sponsored, by the way, but in any case, that battery brand is Eneloop, made by Panasonic. And you can see I bought a whole bunch of them with my own money. That's what I'm talking about. And I'll put a link in the description to Amazon if you want to get the same ones. But that's not the end of the story. There's actually even more stuff that's surprising that you need to know. For example, it turns out that the lower capacity rechargeables are actually way better. So taking a step back to my original problem, regardless of the brand, what is the cause of this issue of rechargeables just not working when I finally need them? Now, there's two main ones from my understanding. One is the self-discharge rate of rechargeable batteries, and the other one is just the degradation of the cell in general. So the self-discharge rate is every rechargeable nickel metal hydride battery, just by sitting in storage unused, it's gonna discharge itself a little bit over time, even if it's not plugged into anything. And what I found is that the self-discharge rate and the life of the cell in general are both heavily affected by the brand of the battery and its capacity. If you ever do a search for the best rechargeable battery brands, pretty quickly you'll find people talking about Eneloops. And yes, I found that they pretty much are the best. Everyone agrees they're the best. They're made by Panasonic, and they actually were the ones that created the low self-discharge technology before anyone else. Now, these days, low self-discharge, basically all batteries are that, but still, the Eneloop ones are the best of them. But I'll come back to the brand differences later. First, I want to focus on what I found the most interesting, which is the capacity, and this applies across all the brands. There's one Reddit comment that I found that pretty much sums it up perfectly. He says, "I know this is going to sound crazy, but higher capacity in nickel metal hydride is bad. Replace your 2800 milliamp hour cells with 2000 milliamp hour cells, and it should run for a year easily." He does say that the high capacity ones will be dead within a month, but I think that's a bit of an exaggeration, or maybe those are just the really old ones. But he is right about the high capacity and self-discharge. So for example, taking a look at the Eneloop Pro line versus the regular ones, the Pro are the higher capacity ones. They're advertised for like high drain devices like cameras and stuff. And these are still technically low self-discharge, but not nearly as much as the regular ones. For example, the latest generation regular Eneloop batteries are 2000 milliamp hour capacity. And right on the packaging, it advertises as being able to maintain 90% of the capacity after 1 year, and that's without being used, or it holds 70% after 10 years, and they can be recharged 2100 times. Whereas the Eneloop Pro, which holds 2550 milliamp hours, they're advertised as being able to hold 85% charge after 1 year in storage. And then they don't really advertise what's after that, probably because it drops off a lot quicker. And the Pros can only be recharged around 500 times versus the over 2000. Now, you might think, wait a minute, that's just a 5% difference after 1 year. But notice how the Eneloop Pros don't seem to advertise anything about how much it holds after the first year, probably because it drops quite a bit quicker after that. But remember, all of this is the self-discharge rate. This is with no drain on it whatsoever. So therefore, the higher capacity rechargeables are really only going to be useful in devices that you use frequently and they have a very high power draw. And therefore, you have to recharge and replace them frequently anyway, so the self-discharge rate is negligible compared to that. However, if it's a device that you either don't use very often or it has a low power draw, like a remote control or something, well, in that case, it's definitely better to use the lower capacity, because otherwise the self-discharge rate is going to greatly eclipse any power draw from the actual device. So it's going to run itself dry way faster than it would to actually use the device with a lower capacity. Now, back to the difference in branding and also the age of the things. One thing you might notice is that on cells like from Duracell, what I noticed is they don't really advertise the capacity past the first year. And it seems that only the 5-year guaranteed Duracells even claim any percentage after the year at 80%. But the newer 10-year ones just say it holds a charge after 1 year, but not what percent. Same with Energizer. It just says it holds a charge after 12 months. And that seems to be because, like with Duracell, they're all the higher capacity, so they just don't even say what's past the first year. It probably drops a lot. But also, if you notice your rechargeable is just simply not working or not lasting very long, like I did with my Duracells that I didn't think were that old, well, look at the age of them. I bought these in 2022 and 2020 when I looked at the Amazon receipts. And based on the date codes, they were probably made in 2019 and 2021, although I did have some really old ones apparently from 2013. Anyway, I had to do some digging to find the packaging of the batteries that look exactly like the ones that I bought. I did find someone listing them on eBay, and it looks like even as early as 2016, they started guaranteeing them for 10 years. And I guess only the really old ones were 5 years. And at least for the 5-year ones, on one review page, actually multiple people in the replies as comments talked about how, yeah, this might be good for the first year, but after a little while, they were barely usable. And apparently that's the experience that I had too. And what I found interesting is the regular Eneloops, they don't even have a overall life limit. I mean, they do say that they can hold the charge capacity for 10 years at 70%, and yet they don't seem to imply that there is any overall life limit, which I interpret as meaning they can last a lot longer than that. And from what I've read on Reddit, a lot of people agree that the Eneloops last like 15 years or so, or more. Now, I did notice that the latest Duracell rechargeables do say that they last 10 years. So that's better. So if you have some that are relatively recent, you don't have to go throwing them out. And basically what you do is you look at the stamped number on the battery. The first number is the last number of the year it was made. But another thing I will point out is that a lot of other battery brands are just relabeled Eneloop. Like Amazon Basics and IKEA. Apparently those batteries are also just Eneloop rebranded. Though be aware that, again, some of them are the higher capacity ones. You want the ones that are either like 1900 or 2000. If you get the higher one, like 2450, that's the Pro. It's not as good in my opinion, except for, of course, certain circumstances. Also, looking at the actual capacities, I think that the rebranded ones, like the IKEA, are the older previous generation of Eneloops. They might not be quite as good as the latest Eneloops actually. However, they're probably a lot cheaper. So anyway, I ended up just buying a whole bunch of AA and AAA Eneloops, and I know it sounds like I'm shilling for these. This is not a sponsored video or anything at all. I literally just spent a ton of time looking it up. The one thing I noticed, and be aware of this, if you buy them on Amazon, for example, be sure you look at the actual price per battery, because for some of them, the larger packs are actually more per battery than if you just bought some of the smaller packs. Like I think the 8-pack battery is the most economical one. I'll put links in the description though to the actual ones that I got so you can actually find the listing. Make sure it is shipped and sold by Amazon. Amazon supposedly does not do commingling anymore of any products, so that's good. But I would be curious what you guys think. Do you have batteries that you bought not even what you thought was too long ago and they barely even work? This could be why. They could be just old, or maybe you have had batteries that work totally fine over time. We could talk about that all down in the comments. Now, if you want to keep watching, next up, here's a video I made a long time ago about cool tools you've probably never heard of. I really should make another one of those, but that's definitely one of my favorites. I'll put that link right there you can click on. Of course, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. It helps out with the algorithm these days. And of course, if you want to subscribe, it should be worth it. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in that next video.